called Sid Jacobson. This is the kind of networking we have to do for this stuff. And Sid Jacobson, who was the editor of Harvey for years, is still with the current successor interest of the Harvey Company. He called, gave me Warren's phone number. I called Warren, and we arranged for him to get these pages. So right in the middle of the panel, my phone rings, and it's Warren Kremer, calling from New Jersey, to tell me that they're making arrangements to get these panels. So I turn to the audience here and I say, it's Warren Kremer on the phone. And the whole audience bursts into cheering. I put it up so that Warren can hear it. He's never been to a convention in his life. After the panel, I go out in the hallway and call him back at the panel, and I explained to him, because I wasn't sure he understood what was happening, that he'd gotten me on my cell phone at convention. He said, that was the nicest thing I ever heard. People were, cheering me. And, is that what they do at comic conventions? And I said, yes, we're going to get you to one of these days. Yeah. He said, he's going to try to make it to one of these. We're going to try to fly him out next year.
I'm going to try and make it to see him.
Yeah, he's about 82 now. He drew almost, he's the style, when you see the Richie Rich and Casper style, that's Warren Kremer. Somebody calculated a few years ago that the most number of comic book covers, just talking about covers, in the history of comics, the 5 guys who had done the most were Jack Kirby, Joe Kubert, Gil Kane, Dan DeCarlo, and Warren Kremer, were the 5 most prolific cover artists. Mr. Eisner, sir.
I thought I saw sparks.
These men have never met before.
That is wild.
It shows you what happens when 2 guys who've never met me.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 8th Jack Kirby tribute panel. I think it's the 8th one. And my 11th panel at this convention. I'm probably Mark Evanier, and I have made a rule that I do not go to any convention that will not let me host a Jack Kirby tribute panel. Because and actually, in some cases it becomes superfluous, because we've been talking about Jack on about half the panels that I've done so far here. In fact, I just did the Russell Myers panel, and his name came up in there too. Jack was an amazing gentleman. Well, I don't have to tell you that, you all know that. And most of you had the pleasure of knowing him and meeting him. Let me introduce to you the dais of people we have assembled here. I wanted to get a couple of these people up here to just talk about Jack and repeat some of the things they've said in brief on other panels about Jack. And I will tell you, we will talk to them about Jack for a bit, then I will tell you a little bit about some of the current Jack Kirby business activities and such. And at the closing of this, I'm going to show a videotape that some of you may have seen parts of. It is not one of the happier moments of Jack's life, unfortunately, but it's part of the historical record. It is a 2-part tape, the first part of which is Johnny Carson libeling Jack Kirby, and the second half is Johnny Carson apologizing to Jack Kirby. And during the course of this, I'll tell you the story a little bit about that. Let me introduce to you, starting at the far end, Jack liked pretty much everybody in comics. I don't remember ever knowing of a writer or artist he didn't like. The lowest opinions would be of those people whose works were very derivative, we felt were just imitating or tracing other people's works. That did not apply to any of these gentlemen. These are some of the gentlemen here who Jack had the highest regard for. He used to say that the guy who saved Spider-Man, you could not mention Johnny Romita without the phrase, "a guy who saved Spider-Man." Jack would talk about it constantly. When Jack went over to DC, one of the things he very much wanted to do was to do a very sophisticated romance comic. Eventually, the idea got dumbed down into that True Divorce Cases, Soul Love thing, which we did, which Jack never really understood what he was doing at anyway, but he kept mentioning how much he wanted to get this man to work with him because he truly admires work. Mr. Johnny Romita, ladies. Another artist that I don't think Jack ever said anything but the highest praise for was a gentleman who followed him on to Fantastic Four and Thor. And my first question to him when we get to it will be, be just what is it like to have to follow Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four and Thor. But it was, those of us who felt a certain loss when Jack left those books were more than delighted to see the expert handiwork of Marvel's supreme penciler, Mr. John Buscema. And if you said to Jack, who do you really admire in comics, the first two names, whichever one occurred to him, were either Bill Everett or this gentleman. This gentleman he especially admired not only as an artist, but as a role model. I think Will was almost a father figure in a way that he was in the business about an hour before Jack. Employed him. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But, and actually this man finally achieved something the other night when he actually won an Eisner Award. Is that your first Eisner? I've got 5 of them. Is that your first
I
Eisner
hate
Award?
to tell you what it took to get that. You gotta know the right people.
So you have finally done work that lives up to the standards of Will Eisner.
I'm lying about my age.
And here to my left is the gentleman Jack handpicked as his favorite inker for the last 20 years of his life. Whenever he was available, Jack tried to get him, and I wrote an article for the Jack Kirby Collector recently, because I don't think people realize how hard this man worked. To ink everything Jack Kirby did alone. A lot of people could not have done it even badly, let alone done it well. To ink it and letter it in that time period for that rotten money was an amazing achievement. But the fact that you enjoyed all of those comics and got for that period, we owe an awful lot of thanks to Mr. Mike Reuter. Let me also introduce in the audience a couple of people very briefly. When I was working for Jack, I had the pleasure of having as my friend and colleague and partner and co-conspirator a gentleman who did an awful lot of work for Jack personally and professionally, and was a lifelong friend of the family, Mr. Steve Sherman over there. And Jack's other favorite inker in the last decade or two of his life, and a very close member of the Kirby family. I mean family in the very best sense of the word, because he was practically almost blood over there, with Mr. Mike Thibodeau. I will also introduce you one other person. Jack had, and this Johnny Carson tape, when we show it, you'll see, Jack had an amazing ability to get into trouble. Usually not of his own making. And he had people frequently who bailed him out or would help him a lot. He had 2 attorneys throughout most of the 80s and 90s who were dealing with these problems where people were trying to rip him off, and these people were defending him. And we make a lot of jokes about attorneys charging lots of money and cheating their clients. You find that that's really not the truth. You find that there are people who do enormous work for him. One of them was a man named Steve Rohde, who is now, if you get the ACLU newsletter, Steve is now a high muck-a-muck of the ACLU. He spends 1 hour a week doing his clients, making money as a lawyer, and 50 hours a week protecting civil rights. His former collaborator partner, who's now in his own practice, who did a lot of stuff for Jack over the years, and I knew him mostly as a voice on the phone, dealing with all these, calling me in exasperation at the stupid thing Marvel was claiming this week. This is Mr. Paul Levine over here. Made it possible for Jack to keep staying at the board and working and doing fine work for us and not getting ripped off any more than he already was. Is Adrian here? Is Adrian? Okay. If Adrian, then I'll have him introduce him later. Let me just ask these gentlemen. I'm going to start with Mr. Eisner, if I will. Oh, by the way, you all bought this, right? It's fine book here. I know you've told this story before, but I don't think you've never told it on one of these panels about hiring Jack Kirby, about him coming to work for your studio. And the at some point, we've got to segue to the towel story here.
Well,
But tell us what the operation was that Jack came into.
the company was Eisner and Iger. I formed a company with Jerry Iger, who had been formerly the editor of Kremer magazine, that collapsed after 2 issues. We opened a shop producing packaging comics. In those days, the pulp magazines were dying, and the publishers who were trying to survive were looking for other things to publish, and they were publishing comic magazines, we called them in those days. They weren't called comic books. And there came, as it came to pass, into my shop, because we were hiring people from all over. There was no precedent. There were no background, no comic books, no comic book art, art schools or anything like that. The guys were walking into the shop, and then comes this kid named Jacob Kurtzberg, or something like that. I don't know whatever happened to him, I don't know. But Vinny kind of looked like John Garfield to me at the time. I think he thought it was John Garfield. And we got to work in the shop. He was one of the hardest working guys in the shop, very serious, and the towel story.
Actually, the story that Jack told me was that he saw WOW, and he wanted to be part of it. He went to the address in the magazine, and it was out of business. And they told him about Eisner and Iger and sent him up there.
And it was, actually the shop resembled an Egyptian slave galley, up and down the Nile, and the guys were sitting all around, and I was sitting at the head, beating the drums. But, it was such a new field that really anything he did was innovative. Jack sat along the right-hand side of the wall. This room, a miniature of a room like this, and the penciling guys, the creative guys, are sitting along the side of the wall. It was Bob Powell, Chuck Mazujin, George Tuska on the right-hand side of me. And in the center was a big desk where I would sit down and rough out create the initial characters and pass them down the line. Go down the line and come back up through almost like an animation studio at the time. We were trying very hard to make it profitable because we were getting $5 a page for the work. I was being very innovative on a production point of view because I hired people, and people working on salary. We're not working freelance. Because I reasoned that if I was going to get any quality work out, it's very difficult to tell a freelancer to change panel 3 and move it over to panel 5 because it's going to cost you money. But the guy who's getting a salary would be very happy to change it. Jack was very accommodating, very easy to work with. Last time we were on, the shop grew, started out with maybe 5 people. We were up to about 10 or 15 people at the time. We had it moved to a larger office because we were becoming very affluent at the time. On 42nd Street, right across the street from the news building. And we had 2 offices, 2 rooms, one big large room where all the artists worked, and a little front room. For the artists, it was a big office building, and therefore we decided we needed a towel service. And so we we subscribed to a company that would bring in towels every 2 or 3 days, change them because the artists were washing it in. Well, one day I was in the office, and Iger, who was my partner at the time, came in to me and he said, "Hey, there's a guy actually wants to talk about the towel service." He said, "You're in charge of production." I was the partner in charge of producing. Iger was the businessman. He was 13 years older than me, and therefore he was a businessman. So I went out, and there stands this guy straight out of a Mickey Spillane movie with a pork pie black hat with a white band and white tie and a black shirt, a slightly broken nose, speaking like this. He says, "I'm in charge of the towel service." And I said, "Yeah, well," I said, "we want to change the towel service. We're not happy with your company because the towels they're not coming in right," and so forth. He said, "Well," he said, "we've got the franchise here." So I said, "Well, I know you have," but I said, I called a couple of other companies, and none of them wanted to take on our account. They said, "That's not our territory." So he said, "Look," he said, "we don't want no trouble here. We want everything to go nice, you see." So he says, "You tell me what your problem is, I'll try to fix it." So So I said, well, we want more towels. He said, we can't give you no more towels. Only 4 towels, he says, you've got. Well, anyway, his voice is getting a little stronger, and I'm getting a little worked up. I was getting a little angry, and suddenly behind me out of the back comes Jack. Now, this guy is about 6 feet 2 inches, and Jack's about 4 feet 3. Jack says to me, hey boss, he always called me boss, even for the last day of his life, he always called me boss. He said, well, just a minute, he said, I'll take care of this. He goes to this guy, and he said, what do you want? The guy looks at him, damn it, this little guy. Jack says, look, we don't want any of your crap from you. He said, we don't like your goddamn towel size, now get the hell out of here. I'm thinking, how am I going to mop up the blood off of To my amazement, to my astonishment, to this day, a guy turned around and walked out. I couldn't understand. Jack said to me, he comes back again, call me, he says, I'll take care of this. That was Jack. We changed Jack's name very shortly from Jacob Kurtzman of Pittsburgh, whatever it was, to Jack Curtis. He was doing a Count of Monte Cristo story at the time. And then we changed it later on to another, ultimately became Jack Kirby. But it was a joy to work with Jack. I always enjoyed working with him. Didn't see him after he left. He joined up with Joe Simon. I didn't see him again until many years later here at the comics conventions, where we began to talk to each other. This interview that I tried to do with him was more than an interview, was a conversation. Was a difficult one because by then he had matured and he had all these years of difficulty with people, as you outlined. I found that we couldn't talk to each other with the way we used to in the shop itself. Anyway, that's the story that you want to hear.
When he first came to you and walked in with his samples, you looked at them, you said, this guy's good enough to work for me. Did you see in those samples that this man might go on to something beyond that?
That's an interesting and very important question because nobody in the shop, in my shop, believed that there was any real future other than to go, quote, in italics, uptown, to be an artist, real artist uptown. None of the guys, there was nobody even assumed that there would be any future. I was the only man in the shop that really almost fanatically dreamed that he was going to spend the rest of his life in this business. Nobody in my shop had planned to spend the rest of their life in this business. They were there to make enough money. To Jack, this was piecework, as far as he was concerned. Everybody else was just working. Actually, it was a wonderful time when we look back at it because it was you were learning while you were working.
After he left you, he got the strip Lone Rider, and he said that the samples had improved because he worked for you and learned from you and all the people around you.
Well, that was the advantage of the shop. That's what I was trying to emphasize when I talked about doing it on a salary basis versus a freelance payment. It enabled me to create what I felt was the only way we would survive as a small shop is to produce good material, creative material. And I was very creative. Look, actually, and the truth was I was the player manager because I was working too alongside the guys. And we literally learned from each other as much as schoolroom as anything else. In fact, my shop was constantly raided by other publishers who were coming in the field because we were a source of talent. Keep in mind, there was no talent floating around the city at that time. There was no precedent. We were just artists coming from all areas. Jack was not so much interested in writing it as he was in producing good art. He was a strong draftsman from the very beginning. There's no question about it.
So when you saw him starting to become prominent in the comic book business, you were not the least surprised that he was
No. It was very obvious. When he left, he left to join Joe Simon to work for Victor Fox.
And you had had many runs with Mr. Fox.
Oh, yes.
Tell us a little about Victor Fox.
Well, Victor Fox, using the movie syndrome, was a feisty little man. Actually, he was Edward G. Robinson. Jack Kirby was John Garfield, he was Edward Robbins. Victor Fox had been an accountant for Detective Comics, which was owned by a fellow named Harry Donenfeld, which was a predecessor of DC. And they had a character called Superman, which was selling very, very well. Superman, I might tell you parenthetically, was the result of one of my great business decisions in my life. Two guys from Cleveland wrote to me sometime about 2 years before that and sent me 2 comic strips that they wanted us to show. One was called Spy, the other was called Superman. It was Joe Siegel and a kid named Schuster. I wrote them this long, very, very erudite letter advising them that they weren't ready for big time. They could stay for another year at the art school and polish up their stuff. At any rate, Donenfeld and Leibowitz, who was a partner, built this company very quickly, and Superman was bursting through the scene, very successful. Victor Fox, who was working as an accountant, was adding up the money, began to realize that there was big money in this thing, so he thought he would go into the publishing business too. And he came to Eisner and Iger, which was the main source of supply in town, and he said, I want some comics. Well, my partner Iger was the guy that got the account. These 2 guys got along fairly well, because Iger was a very aggressive, feisty little guy, and so was this fellow. Well, Victor Fox was had a very funny, strange office. You came in his office, you couldn't get in to see him because everything was locked. You know, locked doors, locked all kinds of things, and he talked in very mysterious ways. Anyway, he gave me some instructions on what kind of characters he wanted. He wanted this very strong character with a cape and a red suit and a label on his chest. Jerry Iger, my partner, brought it back to me and shot me. He said, "This is what a new customer wants." And I said, "Hey, that looks a little like Superman, doesn't it?" He said, "Who cares?" He says, "He's willing to pay for it." He said, "Don't mind." He says, "You know, you got this idea you want to be a famous artist." He says, forget that, just turn it out." Well, I did the thing, and of course, it was, very shortly afterwards, Victor Fox was sued by DC Comics. I get this call from Fox to come over to his office. So I come over and he sits down and he says, "Now," he says, "listen," he says, "they're going to subpoena you," he said, "you know, I owe you some money. You owe us about close to $3,000, $2,800 or $3,000 a time, which is like $300,000 today. I mean, this is big money." And he said, "You know, if I'm sued," he says, "and you say the wrong thing," he said, "you ain't going to get no money." Well, Iger is standing there and he says, "Hey," he said, "you know, do whatever he says." And I said, well, anyway, he asked me, and I said, he's asked me to go into court and lie. I said, that's illegal. So he says, my partner always had things like, he said, "The trouble with you is you got this naive idea." He says, "You're just a kid." He said, "I'm 19 years old." He said, "You don't know about life." He said, "Go in and do what he tells you to do." So anyway, I couldn't do it. I went home that night and I thought about it and I said, "I can't do this." So I went into court and I testified against Fox because I said that he instructed us to do it. Fox's defense was that we created, he had nothing to do with us.
Oh.
I just asked these people to give me a hero, and they gave me a hero to look like Superman. I didn't know what, I don't know anything. So anyway, Fox lost the case, but we never got the money. My partner was very angry at me, as you can imagine. He threatened to split the partnership, and he was going to rearrange the partnership so he could get the money. Anyway, that ended that affair with Victor Fox. That's the true story about Victor Fox. It has to be true because I'm the only witness alive.
A few years later, Jack found himself in a comparable situation because when he and Joe Simon went to work for DC Comics, they were suing Captain Marvel, Fawcett people, on the same basis. And Simon and Kirby had done the first full issue of Captain Marvel Adventures, and Jack was sent in. They sent Jack and Joe Simon over to see their lawyer, Louis Eisner. He he was telling them what to say, and they kind of went back and forth. And Jack was saying, finally, Simon, hey, I got to do what Eisner did. We got to tell the truth. And ultimately, Jack ended up not having to testify, partly because he was refused to say what his employer wanted, but partly because Jack was not a very good witness, they found out over the years. But he really admired Will for that and many, many other things. Let's talk to Mr. Romita here while Mr. Eisner is signing a copy of his book.
I knew that was a gimmick.
I just get people on panels like your book site. When you started out in comics, what was the influence? I mean, you must have seen Simon and Kirby comics around.
Oh,
What was the influence of?
When Captain America 1 came out, I was about 10 years old. And I was blessed with an ability to observe and to understand what I saw, and I immediately saw this was different than all the other crap that I had seen. No offense. All the other stuff I had seen was very crude, outside of maybe Byron's books were very impressive with George Tusker and guys. But I was aware of it from the beginning that this was explosive stuff and different. You could see it was done quickly, it was done gracefully, it was amazing, full of life. Everybody else sort of had their mouth closed and their eyes semi-lidded, they were all asleep. To me, every comic character was asleep before Jack Kirby got in there. He woke us all up, he said, "Hey, pay attention to it," that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what his artwork did to me. From the minute I saw it at 10 years old, I was drawing using all the tricks he was using. I popped my characters right outside the panels the first time I saw the day after that Captain America #1. But this is 1940. Will, the story you just told us took place in what part of the 30s? 39?
Sorry, not as late as that.
38, 37?
37, 38.
And when Superman came out in 38?
All came out, Superman came out,
I think it was in early 36.
38, Superman was 38.
38,
38.
Yeah, see,
How many
I was
numbers?
trying to get a time frame.
No, because, you're certain about that?
Yeah.
So I-
Well, it was dated
Exactly.
They probably came to you, they came to you in 36 probably, the two kids.
Well, it was a year before because Superman and Spy, both those features were floating around town
Yeah.
for almost a year and a
Yeah,
half. Nobody
right.
couldn't find
So I was
any
just trying to
Spy.
get it into perspective, because I was 10, but in 49, when I was 19, I got into comics, regretting every one of the years in between the 39 and 49 that I wasn't in the business. It killed me that everybody else, even Joe Kubert, that son of a 14 years old, he's doing comics. And I was in high school, and I wanted to kill him, but I
He
found out what age
was sweeping up my shop at 14 years
I
old.
mean, how soon after that did he do the Rose and the Thorn and things like
I
that?
don't know how.
He did a Flash story when he was
I lost
14.
track of most of these guys. They
All I can do is I thought guys like Kubert and everybody else was an old man. This guy was 19, he's starting the comic book business, and I was 12. This guy was only 7 years older than me, And so I have to keep it all in a time frame. Like, John, you got...
You young fellows are quite marvelous. I think.
I still regret, believe it or not, I'd accept the consequences. If I could have been in that first generation of artists with you guys, I would crawl on my belly.
Let me make a correction. Let me reassure you that they call it the golden years, but gentlemen, it was not the golden years, it was 11 years. Everything was black and white.
I understand, but still it was groundbreaking. And that very groundbreaking, when I got in 10 years later, and when John started the business, we were following established routes that had been done by you guys. I just yearned for the possibility I could have been a groundbreaker and not been a follower. I've been a follower for 50 years, and I still get mad when I think about it. That's my take.
How many people here disagree with the premise that John Romita is not a groundbreaker?
Well, I know what I look at in the mirror every day.
We don't care. All right, now,
Jack Kirby was an influence on me. He almost displaced Milton Caniff, because I was absorbing Milton Caniff through my pores at the time. Jack Kirby comes in and does this. I was torn between the two of them. I was not even an Alex Raymond fan. As much as he polished stuff, I could not resist the power of Kniff and the power of Kirby. And they molded me. Every single panel they did taught me a lesson. And that's how I got into comics.
Now, when you were working for Atlas in the 1950s, one day Stan says to you, I think I'm going to have you draw a Captain America story or two. Tell us about that moment.
Well, it jumped out of my skin. And then I got cold sweat because my desire to do it was only surpassed by my fear of failing at it. And sure enough, I set out, the first page was like I was doing Kirby. Everything I could think of and remember from Kirby. I don't think I could afford to have a lot of books. I only had a couple. And halfway through that first story, it's like some kind of a irresistible weight pulling me down. I drifted into Kniff. Now, what the hell Kniff was doing in Captain America, I have no idea. It's the only way I knew how to feather it with a brush. So here I started out drawing pencils like Kirby, and I aimed it like Kniff. It became a mishmash that I was embarrassed by, but I was so happy to do it. I was hoping nobody would notice. And the other thing is that that only lasted a short period. 54, I think within a year it was dead. It had a couple of issues in Young Men, and then two Captain America issues, 76 and 77, maybe 78, 3 issues. And it got dropped, and I'll tell you, I almost quit the business. Because I felt personally responsible. How could a jerk like me let Captain America fail in competition? I said, this is ridiculous. I had the best opportunity in the world, and I let it fail. I took it personally. Years later, Stan told me, it had nothing to do with you. It had to do with the political climate, the bad reputation the American flag had at the time. Everybody was burning the flag or something. He said the Korean War was a bad time to try and do Captain America. Chauvinism was out, and Captain America took the rap, and Stan dropped the book because it wasn't selling. I always thought if I had been a better artist, I could have made Captain America's sale in 54. Funny fan.
Okay, now let's jump ahead here, because we've got a lot of ground to cover here, and I know you've told this story before a couple of times, but I think it's appropriate to tell it here. You were working for DC in Romance Comics. There was something, there were no more, they were backlogged. You went over to Stan, you said, I want to ink stuff. They had to ink the Avengers because Wally Wood had just left, and because Wally Wood had just left, it was also opening on Daredevil. And Mr. Lee sticks you with Daredevil, and you sit down, you do your first couple of pages, and what happens?
That's the Kirby connection. There's another one in between there. I'll get to it if I get a chance. He looked at my first 3 pages of Daredevil. I wrote them in fully aware that they were rather passive. That sleepwalking stuff that I was talking about, I was doing it after 8 years of romance. Every panel was a sleepwalking panel. I bring him in. Stan loved the splash because it was a human interest splash. It wasn't an action splash. The next 3 pages, he just looked at it and said, no, this is no good. He says, you're thinking like a romance artist. I said, well, that's what I've been. He called up Jack Kirby while I'm standing there. Jack, he says, I need some help. I got John Romita here. I want him to do Daredevil, and he's doing it very quietly. I need, if I have somebody describe the plot to you, can you do the first 10 pages and send him it wasn't a breakdown, it was like a pacing guide with silhouettes and initials and some expressions, but mostly a pacing guide. Close up, long shot, sequence, all of that stuff. I said, sure. 2 days later, I get 10 pages of breakdowns. And the difference was my opening sequence, right after Matt Murdock goes into the building, the law offices, it gets some emergency pops up. He jumps into his apartment. He slips through he goes through a door to a secret workout room, and he takes his clothes off and puts on his Daredevil costume. I mean, I did it the most mundane way any idiot could have done it. For a guy who was in comics 15 years, I should have been whipped. Well, Jack Kirby's pages were like a primer, a revelation to me. His sequence was Jack Kirby sends Matt Murdock tearing his clothes off through the workout room, does a double flip, he's in his Daredevil outfit, it jumps out the window without looking. Fortunately,
Kind of
there's
a
a
metaphor for Jack's
Fortunately,
career.
there's a flagpole on the 15th floor. He swings from the flagpole, he double, and you know, there's a comic trick. If you do a double flip in the air, it breaks your fall. Well, he does a double flip in the air, and he lands not on one taxi cab, he lands on 2 taxi cabs. If you look at issue 12 of Daredevil, you will see the funniest thing you ever saw. One foot on the trunk of one cab, the other foot on the, and just, these 2 guys were just staying right alongside each other, just like the flagpole on the 15th floor. And he's going uptown on the west side, on East River Drive, zooming at 60 miles an hour, and he's doing what do you call it, trick riding like 2 ponies from a John Wayne movie. And I said, say no more, I understand exactly what you're doing. If you can't make it bounce and swing and spin and somersault and crash through glass and break tabletops, don't do it. That was the Marvel way to do things, and Jack showed it to me in 3 pages. And from that time, I understood the problem, and I knew how to solve it to a degree. I was never going to match Jack Kirby, but at least I knew the right route.
The story has always been, Don Heck once said to me that at that time, Stan wanted everybody in comics drawing in their own natural style. He wanted Kirby to be Kirby, he wanted Ditko to be Ditko, he wanted Colin to be Colin, and he wanted everybody else to be Kirby.
That was what Don felt, you know, sadly, that was what one time he came into my office and said, you know, I don't think I'm going to stay here anymore. He said, if Stan wants John Buscema or John Romita, let him get John Buscema and John Romita. I'm tired of trying to fake those guys. And I felt embarrassed because I was the guy he was talking to. I said, listen, Don, he doesn't mean you have to draw like us. He means you have to do what we did when we started, was incorporate all of the dynamics and the pacing and timing that Jack Kirby used to use. We didn't, neither one of us drew like Jack Kirby. I never drew like Jack. I aspired to, but I never could do it. I could never duplicate it. I had completely different. But the approach, the pacing, the storytelling, the dynamics, or he hoped for, was what became the Marvel style. It had nothing to do with the actual physical technique. It had to do with the mental approach. And Don never quite separated those 2 thoughts in his head. He always felt obliged to draw like us. And I said, no, he's not asking you to draw like us. He's asking you to draw like yourself, because he was a better stylist than I was. I mean, I admired Don in that. Don Heck's style was tremendously independent from everybody else. He had a distinctive style. And I just got so frustrated that he was misunderstanding Stan's correction. Stan sometimes was a little bit quick and brusque with his announcements and pronouncements. And I always felt bad that misunderstanding happened between them. He worked for Stan longer than I did. He started before me and worked during the 50s slump when I was doing romance stuff in DC. Heck was one of his aces. And it drove me crazy that would happen. But it was complete misunderstanding, and you know, he had so many unfortunate misunderstandings between the published stuff against him and everything else. It drove me nuts.
Pass the microphone to your colleague there, who has a comparable story about coming back to Marvel. Tell about your first job on superheroes and the whole story you did.
I don't remember these things as well as these guys. I don't know why. But when I went back to comics after 8 years, I had been doing advertising. It was a different ballgame. And Stan gave me my first book to do, and it was laid out by Jack Kirby. He had a lot of confidence in me. And I went over Kirby's drawings and changed them to my style. But I didn't understand what Jack was doing. To me, I just didn't understand anything. I just figured drawing is drawing. I had no idea that there was a difference between doing advertising and comics. And the second book I got was a Hulk book. I laid out myself, and I fell on my face. It was a very painful situation. Stan called me into his office and gave me a batch of Jack Kirby books. And I began to understand. And I didn't study them, I swiped them, which I still do today. And the thing is that you will not be able to find out where I swiped it. I love the way Jack would destroy a couple of guys with one fist, and I did the same thing, but I only reversed it, or I do it from the top or below. But I swiped everything in the beginning. And this one book I had to do with Submariner and some other character was the first one I had done after I had the Jack Kirby books. And Stan loved it. Called me up and he said, "John, you got it." He said, "Now tone it down a little." I went overboard. Every panel was an explosion. And it's been a real, I can't say it's a joy. I would have rather worked on Conan all my years at Marvel than do any of the superhero stuff. I still can't understand it. I hate this stuff. Truthfully, it just doesn't make sense to me. I have the same problem with romance. I think, romance stories are ridiculous. I was too old to enjoy them, really. But I would have preferred doing Conan my entire life. That book was, and by the way, they offered me to do a book on Hal Foster's Prince Valiant. And I sat on my hands, and the next thing I know, they gave it to some other guy in England. And I regretted it ever since. I would have loved to work on a Prince Valiant book.
I'd pay to see that.
I'd pay to do it.
What was the challenge to follow Jack on Fantastic Four and Thor, doing those characters?
When Stan called and he said, "We're going to put you on the Fantastic Four," I said, "Stan, are you sure you want me to do it?" Hey, Jack scared everyone. He scared the pants off. I mean, this guy would, I've said it before, I will say it again, he approached genius, as far as I'm concerned. He revolutionized the way we did comics. And I said, "Okay, Stan, I'll try my best." And apparently it sold because I did it for, I think, I don't know how many issues. I worked on both those books.
How did you just feel that you're sitting there drawing characters Jack had designed, working in his, did you feel that how much, to what extent did you feel you had to draw it like Jack, and to what extent did you feel you could insert your own designs and your own?
I could never draw like Jack. No one can draw like Jack. I mean, this guy was fabulous. I did it my style. Again, I used his books. I had dozens of Jack's books. I needed a panel. I flipped through the books. I did that panel. And that's the way I worked. No, I'm not kidding you. I'm serious. I worked from Jack's books, panel after panel, practically, until I started getting the feel of it. And then it was still a trial. I still use those, but I still have Jack Kirby's books next to me. I am not comic book oriented. It's a difficult situation for me to work on comics. When I got Conan, I dropped the superhero type layout. We went in more to the realistic type thing, and it worked with Conan, but it doesn't work with the superheroes. It never will.
Let me pass this mic to Mike and ask him. One of the things that I find, I met Mike before he even worked with Jack. Okay, before he worked with Jack. And he was at that time working with Russ Manning. He was doing work for Western Publishing on the Disney comics. After he left Jack, he worked for Disney for many years, drawing Winnie the Pooh, merchandise art, and other illustrations. And the thing I always found interesting is how you talk about how your experiences with Jack had influenced how you drew Winnie the Pooh and such. Can you talk a little bit about the influence there?
Several times I've pulled out large group scenes that I worked on with all the 100 Acre Woods characters. I said, this drawing exists because when I did it, I thought Jack Kirby, and people look at it and they go, "Right, Mike." Maybe it was philosophy. The most important thing I learned from Jack is I have some pieces that I've never sold that I would probably keep, and you're not supposed to be enamored of it, your own work. But a couple years later, I look at it and I go, God, did I do that? And it was one of those things where, with the blank piece of paper, the instructions were, we want to see concepts with the characters making their own gifts for Christmas. And I just started it in the center of the sheet of paper, and I'm thinking, Jack would start at the corner, or he'd start here, and I just started working at the coup, and I'm working on, by the time I'm finished, it's like, God, did I do that? But it was, so it doesn't look like anything Jack Kirby drew, but it was the things that I learned by osmosis that you do it, and I think when Jack would start, sometimes, because of his genius, the hand and the pencil, it just took over, and it was, and it is. And so I continue to tell people that almost all of my large group scenes of Pooh concepts and finished art were, I was thinking Jack Kirby. You can't see it. I think it's what you guys were saying earlier, is that you don't want to duplicate what he did, but think about what he did. Everything I ever did with Winnie the Pooh character art in the 8 years I was doing it for Disney was that every drawing, whether it's one character, 2, or 10 characters, tells a story. All the characters are acting and working with each other. It's just a simple magic moment, or it's a real situational thing. And those are the things I learned from Jack. You just don't put the drawing on the page. It exists for a reason, and it's doing something. And so that's the debt I owe to Jack Kirby. And I think that a part of that influence on me, even though you maybe can't see it, is that when I retooled the look of the Pooh characters 8.5 years ago, when they ended the exclusive license with Sears and said, we're going to open it up to the whole world, the designer came to me and said, will you retool the Pooh art? And I said, I don't really like Pooh. If you let me stylize it the way I want to, okay. So I did, they liked it, and in 3 years, Pooh was outselling Mickey Mouse worldwide. So it's a little, when you think of Jack Kirby and you think of this incredible dynamics, you're never going to think of Winnie the Pooh. But I'll say almost every drawing I did, Kirby was in here.
Absolutely.
Over the years, I saw people come always to Jack and ask for art tips. And I never saw him give an art tip that was about drawing, it was about thinking. He would always give people a philosophical concept. Even if they asked, how do you draw hands, he would tell them how to think about how to draw hands. It was a variation of Professor Harold Hill, the think method.
It's a lot more than you think.
It's the microphone there.
Well, that's almost exactly what it was. He used to tell me all the time, I worried too much about materials, details, pen points. He'd say, they're not paying you for what you do on the paper. They're paying you for the thinking process before you put it on paper. The other thing I will tell you, you were saying the blank page. 50 years I've been in this business. Every time I pick up a page, a board to do a page, I see nothing. I swear to you, with the script or a plot and all my notes, until I start thumbnailing, I see nothing. Jack Kirby claimed he could see the panel he was envisioning. He envisioned it and saw it on the page, and all he did was trace it. I know he was oversimplifying, but whatever he saw, I've tried everything. I've closed my eyes, I've kept them, I've tried every trick in the book to visualize what I do not see anything on the paper. I have to start feeling my way until I get a few shapes, then I can build. All I will tell you is if he was blessed with that ability to see everything he wanted to do on paper in composition, and all he had to do was make it a close-up or a distance shot, that was a blessing that I wish I had had. I think I probably would have looked a lot younger and felt a lot better if I had. I aged myself every day on the board. It was like pulling out my intestines. As John said, if you think we had fun, I mean, maybe guys like Will and Jack Kirby and I used to say John Buscema. Now he tells me it was painful for him too. I always thought he was having a ball. I thought he was knocking out these pages and listening to opera while he was up. And I found out so many few blessed guys that have this ability to translate what's in their mind to the paper painlessly, or at least comparably painlessly. Mine was always a painful process. The reason I asked Dan not to let me pencil anymore is that I felt like I was killing myself. I was chipping off pieces of me every time. I said, let me ink. So he lied to me and said, yes, you can ink. Come back to us and you can ink. And a week later, he put me on Daredevil as a pencil.
Jack did, I saw this from the side, start at the left-hand side. If he didn't do a double-page spread, he would start at the left-hand side and just draw in. It was like the drawing was under there. He was just tracing it. People often come to me, they say, let's do a book of all of Jack's rough sketches. And the answer is, there really aren't any. He did not do roughs. If he did a rough, it was usually because the editor said, I gotta see a rough first. So Jack, who already had the drawing in his head, would sit down and do the rough so he could do the final drawing. He did not do preliminary sketches very often.
You don't do preliminary sketches either, do you?
I always do.
Oh, you mean, but on the panel?
No, I do it on another sheet of paper, then I slide it under.
He's been lying to me for years.
Anybody will tell you.
He used to tell me to throw away my eraser. Jack Kirby told me first. Never erase a line.
That's true.
With me, I erased every other line. I was self-destructive. But he used to tell me, don't spread it. Just take the side of the pencil, do your basic shapes, then finish it up and get the hell out. The worst thing you would do is better than most guys' best stuff. Sounds good, but it never worked for me. If I did a bad panel, I could not do the second panel.
Can I say, I disagree with this guy. I walked into Marvel one time and John did a fabulous splash page. You know what a splash page, that's the first page. I went out to lunch, I came back, he had changed the whole damn concept. But the first concept was fabulous. John is a perfectionist, that's his problem. I do a panel, if it comes out fine, I'm happy. If it doesn't, I say, well, the second panel might come out better.
It's okay when your first panel is better than most guys can do in the first place. It's guys like us that struggle.
Can I say something about John's inking? Because most of whatever career I had in comic books was inking. And I remember, was it 3 or 4 issues of Spider-Man that Gil Kane penciled. And then you took a kneaded eraser and softened all of his hard chiseled edges and inked those books. And those tattered books are still in my library of comics, which is very small. I've got the Marvel Masterworks collections of your Silver Surfer, which I think are fantastic. I've drawn, but the inker in me looks at those Spider-Mans, and it's just, my God, it is the most brilliant inking. Whatever power Gil Kane had is still there, but all of the harshness is gone.
It's interesting. Gil, I think outside of Gil probably hated them because they changed almost everything. It was his proportions that the only problem I have with him is I made everybody 6'5". I always had to shrink Spider-Man by like about 7 or 8 inches. And once I made the head bigger and fleshed him out a little bit, instead of looking like Abraham Lincoln, he looked more like Peter Parker. That's the only changes I had to make on him. And I used to learn every single job I did. I learned more and more. You know the emblem on Spider-Man's chest? Ditko did a dumb-looking thing that looked like a tattered brush. And I did a worse-looking version of what Ditko did because I felt obliged to follow it. Gil Kane comes in and does this beautiful fore and aft spider design on his chest. And from that time, I never did it any other way. Gil Kane actually led me by the nose every time I inked his stuff. I learned something. Got to tell you, his drawings were based on mannequin designs, and he taught me almost everything on dynamics all those years I've been doing it. He had a mannequin. He gave me his old mannequin once in the office. He had bought a bigger and better one, so he gave me his old mannequin. Yeah, don't you ever see his hinges on his basic drawing? It's got hinges on all the elbows and knees.
This is a revelation to me. I learned something after all these years.
Mark, am I right? I think you
Yes, correct, yes.
Extensively.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will tell you another thing Gil Kane did.
Go back to the microphone.
Gil Kane had a great trick that he told me about. He said, when you reach in comics, he said, you know, the human arm is a certain length. He said, most people, even Hal Foster did this when they printed. He said, Jack Kirby does this. He said, you take every joint and take all the cartilage in between the bones and stretch them out. So that if Prince Valiant does this, you can stretch 4 inches further than you would marble. And that was the trick I learned from him.
Yeah, but Jack Kirby destroyed the human body. What Jack Kirby did to the human body is unbelievable, but it worked. It worked. That's the important thing. He told that story, and no matter what the figure was doing, you believed it, even though it was out of whack. I once had a class one time. The guy said, "Well, he put 6 joints in the hand." No way. They brought it up to me. Had 6 joints in the fingers.
He had extra joints in the fingers.
Yeah.
Put an extra one in.
Anything that worked, he would do.
Well, Jack drew figures that existed in different time zones. And if you didn't understand the storytelling, you might look at it and go, geez, that's out of drawing, but then you really looked at it, and if the character is leaping towards you, his foot at the end of that figure is in a different time zone, and then there's 3 or 4 time zones in between.
Well, yeah, you put a grid on his ground, and you've got 12 or 15 feet between one toe and the other toe.
We're gonna get kind of times, I still have to show the videotape, but let's see if anybody out here has a few questions for these gentlemen. In the back, in the red.
Yeah, is there any consensus on the balance of what was the most innovative period of Jack's career? And was that market-driven or driven by Jack's spirit?
What was the most innovative, is there any consensus in the panel as to what was the most innovative period of Jack's career? And was that market-driven or was it driven by Jack's spirit?
It was self-propelled, and it lasted from 1939 to 1975. At least as far as 76, maybe. That's, he was always innovative.
Anybody else want to feel that? All right, another question. There, in the back. Yes. Fred Kita was an old-time comic artist. He was not George Tuska. Has anybody heard about Mr. Tuska? Until he was getting a pacemaker.
No, he was here.
He was here?
We were at the Captain America
Oh,
celebration.
that's not-
Okay.
He got an award.
Did he know it?
Oh, yeah. he was-
Okay.
Yeah, it was
So did
wonderful.
John get an award
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
And Marie Severin got in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
Actually, the only thing that was missing last night was that Joe Simon wasn't there. Gene Colan, George Tuska, and I were the only living remnants of Captain America artists, I guess. We should have had Mike on there because he did that beautiful. Did you work on that Treasury? Did you do any of the Treasury in '76?
I don't think so. I may have